Welcome to the polling station with Johnny Ward and William Kedjanyi. And news has emerged that Prince Charles and Camilla have gotten the COVID vaccine. Have you gotten the COVID vaccine, William Kedjanyi? Have all the luminaries of British life gotten the jab?
No jab for me just yet. Thankfully, my parents have had one, and we are increasing apace in terms of the amount who have got at least one dose. So fingers crossed, everybody goes and gets their vaccine.
Yeah, lots of envy in Ireland in terms of the much faster rollout in the UK. But on to Keir Starmer, who was compelled within recent days to say that the vast majority of Labour leaders are behind him despite criticism from the left of the party. We spoke about this briefly last week. He's in the job 10 months now, give or take. How does he wake up in this mid-February morning with a view to what will happen in 2021 for the Labour Party as Boris Johnson, I guess, struggles on with the coronavirus vaccine and implementing Brexit?
He wakes up not in a great place because, and I think Stephen Bush wrote about this very well in the New Statesman, there is now, I think, a growing part of at least the Westminster commentariat opinion and possibly actually public opinion that has more doubts about Keir Starmer. The honeymoon period, which he had last year, in which the only way was up because of what happened in 2019, the general election, and the bounce that Johnson and the Conservatives were getting when the vote unified, has gone. He's now facing the same sort of internal and external challenges that face any Labour leader. Namely, internally, there are challenges to his policy and how effective he is at opposing the government from the left, although it's not just limited to the left. And externally, I think he's struggling probably to define himself. He might be struggling for a bit of relevancy as well. I think that's something that people have mentioned in recent days. So he's got a few challenges on his plate. And I think also, one last thing, he's got the challenge of the Labour Party brand as well, in the sense that that brand needs a lot of fixing. And that's not something I don't think just any one man can do. So Starmer's in a very tricky position, no doubt about it.
What is the Labour Party now? And is this question that he's going to ask by looking at polls and taking a populist stance and doing what the people want? And we spoke about being more patriotic and so forth last week. Or is Labour essentially a left-wing party that may not get enough votes to oust the Conservatives? Is it left of centre, or where is it post Jeremy Corbyn?
I think it's pretty firmly in the centre, if you had to ask me. I think that's at least what Keir Starmer wants the party to be. I think we have to remember that people have very different definitions of, where the Labour Party is and what wings are in control of the Labour Party. Under Jeremy Corbyn, it definitely moved to the left. Its membership did, its aims did. Keir Starmer's looking to move back to the centre, I think mainly for an electoral gambit. When I say gambit, I mean because it's pretty clear that the people around Keir Starmer and Keir Starmer himself believe that's how you get voters to switch from Tory to Labour again. I think, to sum up in a quick way, the Labour Party has moved back to the centre. It's taking back a lot of Liberal Democrats, but it's not taking back anywhere near enough Tories. With first past the post and boundary changes, they need to be making a bigger dent into that Tory column of voters, but that hasn't happened so far. And that's a big issue for Starmer, regardless of where he takes the party. And I think, again, as we said last week, there's a lot of doubt over whether moving it more rightward or hard to the centre, if that's a phrase that even makes sense, will get them to have a bigger inroad with Tory voters in 2019 who switched from Labour. We shouldn't doubt that they've made some progress in that area, but this sort of next phase is much harder, attempting to put Labour into a position to win an election.
You've spoken about this before in terms of the next permanent Labour leader, and I recall looking at a couple at biggish prices. Just at the moment, Angela Rayner 11-2, Andy Burnham 7-1, same price Sadiq Khan, and it's 8-1 bar. Is this a market that long-term sort of speculators should be looking at?
I'd say there's never any harm in taking a look at that market long term. Andy Burnham at sevens might be something we see some interest for, because he said that he does have some ambitions to lead the Labour Party one day, and he has certainly been a more national figure recently with regards to COVID, with regards to fighting for Manchester and that area. Rayner, I originally thought was a fair price at 11-2 just after her election as deputy leader. In fact, I think she'd have taken some stopping in terms of the election to be leader. But she may be a bit wedded to the fate of Keir Starmer, in the sense that if Starmer, for any reason, wouldn't make it to the next general election, it would be hard not to see that impacting on Rayner herself. For all that, I still would give her a fair chance in the hypothetical next vote. Lisa Nandy ran and didn't win, of course, in the last leadership election, but she's still holding a prominent position in the shadow cabinet. She's probably a bit more known, frankly, than many of the other contenders, which I think has actually been a big problem for Labour in general. People don't know really still who, say, Annalise Dodds, the Shadow Chancellor, hugely important position is. And maybe you'd want that to change if you were Labour or you were backing them at some point for 2024. But I think it's one that's worth keeping an eye on. And I think also if there are bigger rumours of, say, a special conference or whatever, not that I think it will happen, I think that's sort of pie in the sky thinking, definitely worth having a look at those who might contract in price, whether they be from the centre of the party or the left.
And just seeing now, the EU Commission chief admits vaccine failures. Ursula von der Leyen tells the Brussels Parliament we're still not where we want to be, and that is something that Boris Johnson at the moment must be getting, just a great deal of satisfaction from. That the UK just seems to be doing so much better than the EU, which is obviously still reeling since that whole Article 16 protocol fiasco as well of a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely. The success of the vaccine rollout for now, I think, will probably keep the Tory vote above Labour's, probably by a margin of, let's say, 3 to 4 points. We've had 6 polls in a row give the Tories a lead, and a clear and definite one. Overall, worth remembering that that's still well within the margin of error. You could put those numbers into a simulation and get differing results on plenty of occasions, depending on where your votes end up. But I don't think there's any doubt now that he is getting a vaccine bounce. I expect that to be sustained for as long as we keep the current pace up, and weather permitting, we're doing pretty substantial numbers anyway. The only issues that might come with the vaccine, well, they're not even with the vaccine rollout, it will be the unlocking. And the choices that will have to be made, first of all, bringing schools back. At what point do you do that? They need 2 weeks notice. Will your cases be low enough? Can you get anywhere close to fixing test and trace, which is sort of vitally important now more than ever? And thirdly, is the gap, say, between getting your most vulnerable groups vaccinated and the rest of the population vaccinated, is that handled right? Do we suddenly do a cliff edge thing compared to a sort of slow and low unlocking? All of that's very important because, again, full compliance with public health measures from me, and I think from the large majority of people in the UK, sure. But if there was to be another lockdown, I think that will be a thin thread which will begin to snap possibly. And that may be reflected in the polls.
Just moving to the States now, there was an interesting article with Donald Trump's, one of his main advisors there in the Sunday Times on Sunday, and it was sort of implied that Trump is enjoying his time off, but will probably be looking at, potentially running again next time around. He's only a for 2024, he's only a 10-1 shot would star with Kamala Harris, 72 favourite. But this is something that a lot of people probably on both sides want to ensure won't happen, that he essentially has no chance of running in 2024, and that maybe the Trump name will be blackened a bit. You've been following the impeachment proceedings and so forth. What is the latest?
Okay, so it was voted that it would be constitutional to proceed with impeachment.
Despite the fact that he's no longer president.
Despite the fact he's no longer president. I think that's fairly big in and of itself, but the margin there was well below what you'd need for a conviction. I think many people presume that the race is already run.
This is also to do with the fact that you want to sort of set, you don't want to set a precedent for down the line that you can't impeach a president who's just left, because it sort of would allow potential presidents to sort of do whatever the hell they liked at the end of their term. So maybe, as you say, in and of itself, but actually going forward, it might matter a bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's important, not just with regards to some of the actions Trump took, but a whole host of issues that would be, in theory, impeachable. Trump is the only person to be impeached twice, but that makes it 3 in the last 30 or so years, obviously, with Clinton, and plenty of people, although I'm not sure that they were completely right of mind, sought that sort of thing for Obama too. So it is important going forward. We were 28-1 when we last had odds up on Trump being impeached. I think you probably could ask for a bit bigger and get it. The really interesting thing is, long term, this would leave Trump as a contender for 2024. He's 10-1 with us to be the elected president, re-elected president in 2024. He's 5-1 for the Republican nomination. Now, I wouldn't particularly fancy him to be elected president again. Wouldn't particularly fancy that. But given his standing in the party, and given how many Republican voters support him, even despite what happened at the Capitol, 5-1 is an interesting price, I think, on him being the Republican nominee in 2 years. And also, the GOP establishment, some parts of it have rejected him. What do you do with his supporters and his acolytes who have been elected now? Is there a split? If so, does that third party get any momentum? And do you see one of the Trump surrogates or one of Trump's family run? Don Jr., Ivanka, 2 people with national profiles now. Ivanka has been looking at it. Don Jr., I know, has been sort of exploring that. Trump has sort of opened the floodgates now for who can be elected president. I've said this before in the polling station, and I believe it holds true. There is nobody now that you could think is sort of too wild to be elected if everything fell the right way, US president. And I'd absolutely count other Trumps and surrogates that way. So it will be really interesting to see how his approval ratings hold up, especially amongst Republicans. That's probably the defining part of the next 18 months of the GOP.
Just to conclude, it's incredible that there is a position where also you can get elected to this position so elderly, where you're way past pension age in any other job, and even if that's someone as kind of sound of mind as Joe Biden, the fact that just being a daughter of Donald Trump could well make Ivanka a reasonable candidate in 3 years' time.
Indeed, it's quite the thing. And in these dynasties, they run and they run and they run. The Bushes, the Clintons very nearly had, of course, a first lady becoming president after, of course, being married to the president. So, who knows? And that family brand will be a pretty powerful thing. If you have a situation where even, say, 60% of the Republican voter base has strong approval for Trump, if he's their number one guy, that is not insignificant. And we've seen what happens when these voting blocks clash with each other. That was a big part of 2019. The Leave vote unified, the Remain vote split. It could be a big part of what happens in Scotland. That's been a deciding factor in Scotland. You've even seen it actually in Irish general elections in the past. There are voting blocks that can coalesce in modern politics, and if they stick together, they become very problematic for other political parties. So I would keep a close eye on that Trump approval rating.
Thank you for your time, William.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, that was a polling station. We'll be back next week.